3 days after the worst blizzard Jackson Valley had seen in decades, an active-duty Navy SEAL followed a set of nearly invisible paw prints into the Wyoming wilderness. He was searching for a pregnant German shepherd that had mysteriously vanished before the storm. But what he found at the end of that trail would uncover a secret buried for years, expose powerful people who thought they were untouchable, and change an entire community forever. The strangest part? It all began with a forgotten dog carrying an old leather strap in her mouth every single morning. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from tonight. If you enjoy stories of courage, faith, and unexpected miracles, please subscribe and join our community. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you, protect your family, and bring peace to your home tonight. Winter settled over Jackson Valley, Wyoming, beneath endless gray skies, bitter winds, and fields buried beneath fresh snow. Michael Carter had returned home only 6 days earlier. After months of continuous deployments and training rotations with his Navy SEAL unit, the quiet of Jackson Valley should have felt comforting. Instead, silence often felt heavier than combat. At 37 years old, Michael carried himself with the disciplined posture of a career warrior. He stood tall, with a lean, muscular build, broad shoulders, a square, angular jaw, and a faint scar running along the right side of his jawline. His dark brown hair was cut short in military fashion, and a neatly trimmed beard shadowed his face. Steel blue eyes studied everything around him with calm precision. Most people in town respected him, but few truly knew him. The deaths of his parents years earlier had left a wound that never fully healed. Since then, Michael had learned to depend on structure, routine, and duty rather than people. Every morning before sunrise, he drove his pickup toward town, passing frozen pastures and snow-covered pines that stretched endlessly across the valley. On the third morning after his return, something unusual caught his attention. Near a lonely stretch of roadside where snowbanks rose nearly waist-high, a German shepherd sat perfectly still. She was not a typical stray. The female dog appeared to be around 4 years old, with the powerful frame of a working-line shepherd, despite obvious signs of hardship. Her coat displayed a deep, matte black saddle covering her entire back and upper sides, contrasted by medium, warm tan coloring across her legs and chest. A black facial mask framed intelligent amber-brown eyes that seemed far older than her years. Her belly hung low with pregnancy. What truly drew Michael's attention, however, was the worn leather strap she carried gently in her mouth. The old strip of leather looked weathered and cracked, as though it had survived years of use. The dog never barked. She never approached passing vehicles. She simply sat facing the road, holding the strap as though it were the last valuable thing she possessed. Michael slowed his truck and watched her through the windshield. Something about her quiet dignity unsettled him. The next morning she was there again. The same position, the same patience, the same leather strap hanging from her mouth. Michael parked on the shoulder and stepped out, carrying part of his breakfast. The wind bit through his jacket as he crouched several yards away and placed food on the snow. The German shepherd immediately noticed him, but did not retreat. Her ears remained alert, her muscles tense, yet she neither growled nor showed fear. Michael slowly backed away. Only then did she approach. She ate cautiously while never taking her eyes off him. Watching her, Michael felt an unfamiliar ache beneath the emotional armor he had spent years building. During deployments overseas, he had witnessed courage in many forms, yet there was something quietly heroic about this pregnant dog enduring winter alone. As he drove away, he found himself glancing repeatedly into the rearview mirror. The image of her sitting beside the road remained in his mind for the rest of the day. A routine began forming over the following week. Every morning, Michael brought food. Every morning, the dog appeared. She never arrived early or late. She simply emerged from somewhere beyond the snow-covered hills, carrying the same leather strap. Gradually, she began wading closer to where Michael parked. The distance between them shortened by a few feet each day. He still avoided touching her. Trust could not be forced. Deep down, he recognized something of himself in her caution. Both had survived difficult experiences. Both relied on vigilance. Both seemed to understand disappointment too well. One morning, Michael noticed how heavily she breathed after climbing through the deep snow. Her pregnancy was advancing quickly. Concern settled heavily in his chest. Wyoming winters were unforgiving, even for healthy animals. A pregnant stray faced challenges far greater than most people understood. For the first time, Michael considered trying to locate where she disappeared each evening. But something told him the dog valued her privacy. He chose patience instead. A few days later, another person joined the strange roadside ritual. Helen Brooks arrived carrying a covered container of cooked chicken. At 71 years old, Helen was small and slender, with pale skin weathered by decades of Wyoming winters. Her silver hair remained gathered into a loose bun beneath a knitted wool hat, and bright blue eyes revealed a determination that age had never diminished. She owned a ranch on the edge of Jackson Valley that had belonged to her family for 3 generations. Since losing her husband nearly a decade earlier, she had managed the property alone. Financial difficulties, rising costs, and declining cattle prices had gradually pushed her toward debt. Despite those burdens, kindness remained one of her strongest traits. She smiled warmly at Michael while setting food beside his. Together they watched the German Shepherd eat. "She needs a name," Helen said softly. Michael shrugged. "Names make things complicated." Helen laughed quietly. "Life's already complicated." The old widow studied the dog for several moments before speaking again. "Daisy. She looks like a daisy to me." The name somehow fit perfectly. Over the next 2 weeks, Daisy became a small but important part of both their lives. Michael found himself looking forward to seeing her every morning. Helen often arrived carrying extra food despite her own financial struggles. Conversations that began with concern for a stray dog slowly expanded into discussions about ranching, family, and life. Michael learned more about Helen's situation. The ranch she loved was in serious danger. Several difficult years had left her with debts she could barely manage. A large energy company had been purchasing land throughout the region, and rumors suggested they were interested in properties like hers. Helen rarely complained, but Michael noticed the worry behind her smiles. Meanwhile, Daisy's condition continued changing. Her belly grew larger. She moved more slowly. Yet she never appeared without the leather strap. Sometimes she stared toward the northern hills beyond the valley, as if listening for something nobody else could hear. Each time, an uneasy feeling settled over Michael. Instinct told him the dog was carrying more than puppies. She seemed to be carrying a secret. By early February, weather forecasts grew increasingly alarming. Meteorologists warned of one of the strongest winter storms Wyoming had seen in years. Ranchers rushed to prepare livestock. Stores filled with residents purchasing supplies. Snowplows were positioned across the county. The evening before the storm's arrival, Michael stopped beside the road as usual. Daisy appeared later than normal. Snowflakes clung to her black and tan coat. Her breathing seemed heavier. Instead of immediately approaching the food, she stood staring toward the distant forest. For several long moments, neither Michael nor Helen spoke. Something felt different. Finally, Daisy picked up the leather strap and slowly turned away. Her swollen body disappeared into the falling snow. Michael watched until she vanished completely among the white hills. A strange feeling settled deep within him. He had learned long ago to trust instincts developed through years of military service. Those instincts now whispered that something was wrong. The storm arrived overnight. Wind screamed across Jackson Valley. Snow buried roads, fences, and entire sections of pasture. For 3 days, residents remained trapped indoors while the blizzard pounded the region. When the skies finally cleared, Michael drove immediately to the roadside where Daisy always waited. The shoulder stood empty beneath fresh snow. No tracks, no movement, no sign of the German Shepherd. Later that afternoon, Helen received a letter from the bank containing a final warning. Unless she found a solution within weeks, her family's ranch would enter foreclosure proceedings. As the elderly widow sat alone holding the notice, Michael stood beside the silent roadside, searching the horizon. Daisy was gone. The storm had passed, but a far greater uncertainty was only beginning. 3 days after the blizzard ended, Jackson Valley still looked as though winter had frozen time itself. Roads remained partially buried beneath towering walls of snow. Ranch fences disappeared beneath white drifts, and entire hills seemed transformed into silent glaciers beneath pale sunlight. Michael Carter returned to the roadside before dawn. The same stretch of highway where Daisy had waited every morning now felt strangely empty. He stood beside his pickup truck, scanning the snow-covered landscape with the instincts that years in the Navy SEALs had sharpened. Something about Daisy's disappearance refused to make sense. Animals vanished all the time during harsh Wyoming winters, yet every memory he had of the pregnant German Shepherd suggested purpose, not panic. Daisy had never behaved like a frightened stray. She always appeared calm, deliberate, and focused. As Michael studied the area more carefully, he noticed something unusual near a partially exposed patch of frozen grass. A shallow depression. Then another. Faint tracks partially buried beneath newer snow. Most people would have overlooked them entirely. Michael crouched beside the marks, his blue-gray eyes narrowing. The trail led north, toward the forest and the mountains beyond. Whatever Daisy had done during the storm, she had done it intentionally. Later that morning, Michael stopped at Helen Brooks's ranch to share what he had found. Helen listened from her kitchen table while clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The 71-year-old widow looked more tired than usual. Dark circles rested beneath her bright blue eyes, and several unopened envelopes from the bank sat nearby. Yet when Michael mentioned Daisy's tracks, a spark immediately returned to her expression. "I'm coming with you," she said before he could finish. Michael sighed. He knew arguing would be pointless. Helen possessed the stubbornness of someone who had spent decades surviving droughts, livestock losses, economic downturns, and personal grief. Years earlier, she had buried her husband and somehow continued running the family ranch alone. Difficult circumstances had never taught her how to quit. "The terrain will be dangerous," Michael warned. Helen pulled on her wool coat and reached for her gloves. "So is sitting here waiting." Michael recognized the same determination he often saw in special operations teammates. Reluctantly, he agreed. The trail quickly became more challenging than either expected. Snow reached knee-depth in some places and waist-height in others. Wind had erased large sections of Daisy's path, forcing Michael to rely on subtle clues rather than obvious tracks. Occasionally, he discovered a faint paw print preserved beneath tree cover. Other times, he noticed broken branches, disturbed snow, or compressed patches where something heavy had passed. Helen followed several yards behind, moving slowly but refusing to complain. As the hours passed, Michael became increasingly convinced that Daisy had not been wandering aimlessly. The tracks maintained a consistent direction. Even during the height of the storm, she appeared to have traveled toward a specific destination. That realization unsettled him. A heavily pregnant German Shepherd facing a historic blizzard should have sought the nearest shelter available. Instead, Daisy seemed determined to reach something farther away. Several times, Michael paused and studied the surrounding terrain. Each new clue reinforced the same conclusion. She had been following a plan. Around midday, they stopped beside a frozen stream to rest. While Michael examined a weathered topographic map, Helen checked messages on her phone. Most of the valley still struggled with unreliable service following the storm, but one notification finally appeared. The message came from an attorney representing a regional land acquisition company. Helen's expression immediately darkened. Michael noticed the change. "What's wrong?" he asked. For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she handed him the phone. The letter informed her that her ranch had been included among several properties targeted for acquisition by a rapidly expanding energy corporation called Black Ridge Energy. The company claimed it wished to purchase land for future development projects. Helen laughed bitterly. Purchase is a generous word. Michael continued reading. The proposal seemed unusually aggressive. Several neighboring ranches had reportedly received similar offers. Those who refused often found themselves facing legal disputes, financial pressure, or complicated property reviews. Something about the situation felt wrong. Michael filed the information away for later. Right now, Daisy remained the priority. Still, he could not shake the feeling that Helen's problems and Daisy's disappearance might somehow become connected. The deeper they traveled into the northern wilderness, the more isolated the landscape became. Towering pines blocked much of the sunlight, creating long shadows across untouched snow. Wildlife tracks crossed the area occasionally, but Daisy's trail remained distinct whenever they rediscovered it. Late that afternoon, they encountered another person. A man emerged from the trees carrying surveying equipment and a heavy backpack. He introduced himself as Ethan Walker, a 32-year-old wildlife researcher working for the Wyoming Environmental Institute. Ethan was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair, a clean-shaven face, and thoughtful hazel eyes that constantly scanned his surroundings. Years spent studying animal migration patterns had made him observant and patient. He explained that he had been documenting winter wildlife activity near the abandoned mining district north of Jackson Valley. When Michael described Daisy, Ethan immediately became interested. 2 weeks earlier, he had spotted a pregnant German shepherd moving through the forest, carrying what looked like an old leather strap. According to Ethan, the dog repeatedly traveled toward the same remote section of the valley. More importantly, she always returned from that direction. Michael and Helen exchanged a glance. Their suspicions deepened. Ethan agreed to help them navigate the increasingly difficult terrain. As daylight faded, the three followed the trail toward higher ground overlooking a broad, snow-covered valley. The abandoned mining district eventually appeared in the distance. Once a thriving operation decades earlier, the area had been deserted after safety concerns and declining profits forced closure. Rusted equipment remained scattered throughout the region. Collapsed structures stood partially buried beneath snowdrifts. The entire place carried an atmosphere of forgotten history. Michael felt a growing sense of anticipation. Daisy's tracks became easier to follow again near the valley floor. Unlike earlier sections, this area had experienced less wind exposure. Fresh clues appeared everywhere. Paw prints, disturbed snow, broken branches. The evidence suggested Daisy had reached this location shortly before the blizzard intensified. More importantly, it suggested she had stayed nearby, rather than continuing farther into the mountains. The final hour before sunset brought them to the edge of a broad clearing surrounded by frozen hills. At first, Michael thought he was looking at another abandoned mining structure. Then he realized the building was actually an old agricultural warehouse. The weathered wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, its roof sagging beneath accumulated snow. Several windows had shattered years ago. Rust stained portions of the exterior walls. Despite its condition, something immediately caught Michael's attention. Tracks surrounded the area. Some belonged to wildlife, others belonged to Daisy. The German shepherd had definitely reached this place. Michael approached cautiously while scanning the surroundings. Every instinct told him they had finally found the destination Daisy had been trying to reach before the storm. The setting sun cast long shadows across the snow as silence settled around them. Whatever answers existed, they were waiting somewhere inside. As Michael studied the warehouse from a distance, Helen's phone vibrated once more. Another message arrived regarding Black Ridge Energy. This time, the contents were even more troubling. Several properties listed for acquisition included ranches bordering old mining lands and abandoned survey zones. Her family ranch appeared prominently on the list. The timing felt suspicious. Helen stared at the screen while unease settled across her face. Nearby, Michael kept his eyes fixed on the warehouse. Daisy had disappeared during the worst storm in years. Now her trail had led directly to an abandoned structure standing near land, suddenly attracting corporate interest. The connections remained unclear, but one thing was certain. The next answers waited behind those weathered walls. As darkness began descending across the valley, Michael tightened his grip on his flashlight and took his first step toward the abandoned warehouse. The last light of day was fading when Michael Carter pushed open the warped wooden door of the abandoned warehouse. A blast of freezing air drifted from inside, carrying the scent of old timber, dust, and snow. Michael stepped in first, his flashlight sweeping across the darkness while years of military training automatically assessed every corner. Helen Brooks followed carefully behind, and Ethan Walker remained near the entrance, watching the surrounding area. The building looked forgotten by time. Broken farm equipment sat beneath layers of dust. Rusted tools hung from crooked walls. Snow had blown through shattered windows and formed uneven drifts across the floor. For several moments, nothing moved. Then Michael heard it, a faint sound. Not the creak of wood or the whistle of wind. A tiny whimper. He froze. The sound came again, soft, fragile, alive. Helen heard it too. Her hand rose to her chest. Together they followed the noise toward the farthest corner of the warehouse, where old canvas tarps and broken crates had collapsed into a rough shelter. What they found stopped all three of them in their tracks. Daisy lay curled tightly against the wall beneath a stack of partially fallen boards. The German Shepherd looked exhausted. Her powerful working-line frame had become painfully thin during the final weeks of pregnancy. Snow clung to portions of her black and tan coat, and her breathing was slow and labored. Yet, despite her condition, she remained alert, her amber-brown eyes immediately fixed on Michael. Pressed against her stomach were 4 newborn puppies. Tiny bodies, no larger than a man's hand, shifted weakly against their mother while searching for warmth. Daisy had chosen this place to give birth during one of the worst storms Wyoming had seen in years. Michael slowly lowered himself to one knee several feet away. He noticed the old leather strap lying beside her front paws. The object appeared even older up close, worn smooth by years of use. Daisy gave a weak, warning growl when he moved closer, not out of aggression, but out of instinct. Every ounce of strength she had left seemed devoted to protecting her puppies. Michael respected that immediately. "Easy, girl," he said quietly. "You did good." Helen's eyes filled with tears. The elderly widow had spent most of her life around animals, but the sight before her touched something deep inside. She slowly removed her wool scarf and folded it beside the puppies to provide additional insulation from the cold floor. Daisy watched carefully, but did not resist. Somehow she seemed to understand that these humans had come to help. Helen examined the puppies from a distance. All 4 appeared alive. Their tiny bodies displayed the same classic black and tan markings beginning to emerge beneath newborn fur. The strongest puppy constantly pushed toward Daisy's chest, while another remained curled quietly beneath its siblings. Michael felt a surprising sense of relief wash over him. For days he had feared the worst. Instead, Daisy had survived. Yet, even as that thought settled into his mind, another detail began bothering him. The warehouse showed signs of recent activity. Several wooden crates near the rear wall appeared to have been moved recently. Snow patterns on the floor looked disturbed. Someone else had been here. Michael rose slowly and began examining the building more carefully. While Michael searched, Ethan noticed something unusual near the center of the warehouse. One section of flooring sounded different beneath his boots. Instead of solid support, the wood produced a hollow echo. He called Michael over. Together they inspected the area. Several weathered planks appeared newer than the surrounding floorboards. After removing debris, Michael discovered a concealed metal ring embedded between the boards. He exchanged a glance with Helen. Someone had hidden something here. Using a pry bar found nearby, Michael carefully lifted the section. Beneath it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. Cold air drifted upward from below. Helen immediately felt uneasy. Ethan aimed his flashlight downward. The beam disappeared into a small underground chamber. Michael descended first. Every instinct told him to proceed carefully. The bunker appeared old but functional. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes filled one corner. Maps covered another. Then, from deeper inside the room, a weak voice broke the silence. I was beginning to think nobody would ever find this place. The man sitting against the far wall looked exhausted but alive. Samuel Reed was 68 years old, tall but noticeably thin from weeks of isolation. His silver hair had grown unruly, and a short gray beard covered his angular face. Deep lines marked years of stress and determination. Despite obvious fatigue, his blue-gray eyes remained sharp and intelligent. He wore a faded canvas jacket layered over old flannel clothing and held a flashlight whose batteries were nearly dead. For several moments, nobody spoke. Samuel simply stared at them as if struggling to believe they were real. Finally, he noticed Daisy through the open hatch above. A faint smile appeared. She found help, he whispered. Michael crouched beside him and began assessing his condition. Samuel appeared dehydrated, but stable. The older man explained that heavy snowfall had collapsed portions of the hidden entrance during the storm, trapping him underground. Without outside assistance, he would have eventually run out of supplies. Yet somehow, he had survived. Michael's attention immediately returned to Daisy. A possibility formed in his mind. The dog, he said. How long has she been coming here? Samuel looked toward the warehouse above. Almost 2 months. The story Samuel told seemed almost impossible. Weeks earlier, while living in secrecy, he began noticing a German shepherd appearing near the warehouse. At first, Daisy kept her distance. Over time, she grew more comfortable. Whenever Samuel left scraps of food outside, Daisy would take only part of it. Later, he realized she often returned carrying small items she found throughout the surrounding area. Pieces of food, discarded supplies, anything useful. During one particularly harsh cold spell, Daisy repeatedly appeared near the entrance, carrying materials that could be used for bedding. Samuel laughed softly while remembering it. I thought I was helping a stray dog survive the winter, he said. Turns out she was helping me. As the storm approached, Daisy continued visiting. Then she disappeared shortly before the blizzard struck. Samuel assumed she had found shelter. Instead, she had chosen the warehouse itself, remaining close enough to continue protecting both her unborn puppies and the isolated old man hidden beneath the floor. Michael felt genuine amazement. Daisy had not simply survived. She had unknowingly kept another human being alive. Once Samuel regained some strength, the conversation shifted toward why he had been hiding there in the first place. The older man's expression grew serious. He slowly opened several weatherproof storage containers stacked against the bunker wall. Inside were thousands of pages of documents, maps, property records, survey reports, and financial transactions. Helen immediately recognized her family ranch on one of the files. Samuel explained that he had spent years working as a land survey specialist throughout Wyoming. During that time, he discovered patterns that made no sense. Ranch owners losing property despite clear ownership. Boundary disputes appearing suddenly. Land values manipulated. Legal records altered. Every trail eventually led toward the same growing corporation, Black Ridge Energy. According to Samuel, the company had spent years quietly acquiring land through questionable methods. Corrupt officials, dishonest attorneys, and unethical brokers helped create a system that pressured small property owners into surrendering valuable land. Helen listened in stunned silence as Samuel revealed that her ranch appeared repeatedly throughout the records. Black Ridge had targeted her property long before she ever received acquisition notices. Night had fully settled outside by the time Michael finished reviewing the first batch of documents. The implications were enormous. What began as a search for a missing dog had suddenly uncovered evidence of something far larger. Yet, among all the discoveries hidden beneath the warehouse, Michael found himself looking back toward Daisy. The exhausted mother lay quietly beside her puppies, while snow drifted against the broken windows above. She had no understanding of corporate corruption, fraudulent land deals, or legal conspiracies. She simply followed her instincts. Those instincts had led her to a forgotten warehouse, a trapped witness, and ultimately, the truth. As Michael closed the final document box for the night, he realized that Daisy's disappearance had never been the mystery. The real mystery was why fate had chosen a stray German shepherd to protect the most important witness in Jackson Valley. The morning after leaving the abandoned warehouse, Michael Carter realized that their discovery had changed everything. What had begun as a search for a missing German shepherd had become something far larger and far more dangerous. Samuel Reed, Daisy, and the 4 newborn puppies were moved to a safer location on Michael's ranch, several miles outside Jackson Valley. The property sat at the edge of a pine-covered ridge, far from major roads and hidden behind rolling hills. Michael believed it was the best place to protect both Samuel and the evidence until they could determine their next move. Samuel occupied a small guest cabin near the main house, while Daisy and her puppies rested inside a heated storage building converted into a temporary shelter. The German shepherd remained weak from childbirth, but recovered steadily. Michael often found himself checking on her throughout the day. Every time he entered the shelter, Daisy would briefly lift her head, confirm that her puppies were safe, then settle back down. The trust between them continued growing. Yet despite the peaceful appearance of the ranch, Michael sensed trouble approaching. The instincts that had kept him alive through years of military service refused to stay quiet. 3 days later, the first sign appeared. A dark SUV drove slowly past the ranch entrance shortly before sunrise. The vehicle did not stop. It simply continued down the road before eventually disappearing. Michael noticed it because almost nobody used that route during winter. The following day, a different truck appeared near the highway overlooking the property. Again, nothing happened. No confrontation, no explanation, just observation. Michael never mentioned the vehicles immediately, choosing instead to collect information. By the end of the week, he counted 5 separate incidents involving unfamiliar vehicles. The pattern disturbed him. Samuel noticed the change in Michael's behavior during one evening conversation. The older man sat beside a wood stove reviewing documents while Michael studied the ranch through a window. Samuel's weathered face tightened. "They're looking for me," he said quietly. Michael did not answer immediately. Deep down, he suspected Samuel was right. Someone knew the former surveyor was alive, and that knowledge would make certain people nervous. Meanwhile, Samuel continued organizing the evidence stored inside dozens of boxes recovered from the underground bunker. The deeper he examined the files, the more disturbing the picture became. Black Ridge Energy had not merely acquired land through questionable legal tactics. According to environmental reports hidden among the records, several mining and drilling operations connected to the corporation had generated serious environmental concerns over the past 2 decades. Water quality reports had been altered. Independent inspections had mysteriously disappeared. Land contamination complaints had been dismissed without proper investigation. Samuel spent hours explaining the documents to Michael and Ethan Walker. Ethan, whose professional life revolved around studying wildlife and ecosystems, became increasingly alarmed. The 32-year-old researcher reviewed maps showing streams, migration routes, and protected habitats located near several disputed properties. "If these reports are accurate," Ethan said one afternoon, "some of these areas should have been protected years ago." His normally calm hazel eyes reflected genuine concern. The issue was no longer only about property ownership. Entire communities and landscapes might have been affected. While the men focused on evidence, Helen Brooks began pursuing another path. She started contacting ranch owners throughout Jackson Valley and neighboring counties. At first, many were reluctant to speak. Years of frustration and disappointment had taught them to remain cautious, but Helen possessed a gift few people recognized. She listened. She did not lecture or pressure anyone. Instead, she allowed people to tell their stories. Gradually, patterns emerged. One family described unexplained legal challenges after refusing to sell land. Another recalled sudden changes in property valuations. Several elderly ranchers spoke of confusing contracts they barely understood. Among those Helen met was Martha Collins, a 68-year-old ranch owner with sun-weathered skin, shoulder-length silver hair, and kind brown eyes. Martha had lost nearly half her family's grazing land during a legal dispute years earlier. The experience left her distrustful of institutions, but fiercely protective of other ranching families. Once she learned about Samuel's evidence, she became one of Helen's strongest allies. Soon, informal meetings began taking place in church basements, community halls, and kitchen tables across the valley. As more people shared their experiences, a sense of unity slowly replaced years of isolation. Families who once believed they were alone discovered dozens of others had endured similar situations. Ranchers began exchanging records, comparing contracts, and identifying recurring names associated with property disputes. Michael observed these developments with growing respect. During military operations, he had seen how effective teams formed under pressure. The same principle seemed to be unfolding throughout Jackson Valley. Ordinary people who previously suffered in silence were beginning to work together. Yet that growing solidarity also increased the stakes. Every new witness and every new document strengthened Samuel's case. Consequently, those responsible had greater incentive to stop the truth from emerging. Michael understood that reality better than anyone. The more progress they made, the more careful they needed to become. Daisy sensed the tension long before most people did. Several times she reacted to unusual activity before anyone else noticed it. One cold evening, Michael stepped outside after hearing Daisy bark sharply from inside the shelter. The sound immediately caught his attention because she rarely barked. When he reached the yard, Daisy stood near the fence with her ears raised and her body rigid. Her amber eyes focused on a distant ridgeline overlooking the ranch. At first, Michael saw nothing. Then, a faint reflection appeared among the trees. Sunlight bouncing off glass. Someone was watching from a distance. The figure disappeared moments later, but Daisy had detected the presence long before any human observer. Similar incidents occurred repeatedly over the next several days. Whether it involved unfamiliar vehicles, movement near the property boundary, or distant sounds carried by the wind, Daisy consistently reacted first. Her behavior reinforced Michael's growing belief that surveillance was taking place. Fortunately, her warnings allowed him to remain one step ahead. The pressure increased further when Samuel uncovered a particularly important collection of files. Hidden inside an old metal document case were financial records linking multiple land acquisitions to a network of attorneys, consultants, and shell companies operating across several counties. Although the records did not prove criminal activity on their own, they established connections investigators would likely find valuable. More importantly, they contained references to properties surrounding Helen's ranch. Samuel spent hours organizing the information into chronological order. As he worked, Michael noticed the emotional burden the older man carried. Years of secrecy had taken a visible toll. Samuel often blamed himself for not coming forward sooner. Yet whenever those doubts surfaced, Helen reminded him of something important. "The truth is still the truth," she told him, "whether it arrives today or 10 years ago." Those conversations gradually strengthened Samuel's resolve. Instead of hiding, he began preparing for the possibility of eventually speaking publicly. Near the end of the week, another unexpected development occurred. A local journalist named Rachel Whitmore contacted Helen after hearing rumors about unusual land disputes. Rachel was 46 years old, tall and athletic, with sun-kissed skin, sharp green eyes, and dark blonde hair usually tied into a practical ponytail. She built her reputation by investigating issues affecting rural communities rather than chasing sensational headlines. Years earlier, a major corporation had attempted to silence one of her environmental investigations through legal intimidation. The experience only strengthened her commitment to uncovering facts. During her first meeting with Helen, Rachel listened carefully and took detailed notes. She asked thoughtful questions rather than dramatic ones. By the end of the conversation, Michael believed she might become an important ally. For the first time, someone outside their small circle was beginning to understand the scale of what they had uncovered. As another Wyoming sunset painted the valley gold and orange, Michael stood outside the shelter, watching Daisy care for her puppies. The 4 newborns had grown stronger during the week, crawling clumsily across blankets while their mother watched protectively. Around them, Jackson Valley was changing. People were beginning to speak. Old secrets were emerging. New alliances were forming. Yet Michael knew the battle ahead would not be easy. Somewhere beyond the valley, powerful individuals were undoubtedly aware that Samuel Reed had survived. They knew evidence existed. They knew witnesses were gathering. And sooner or later, they would be forced to decide how far they were willing to go to protect themselves. As darkness settled over the ranch, Daisy suddenly lifted her head and stared toward the distant road. Once again, she sensed something before anyone else. Whatever was coming next, it had already begun moving toward Jackson Valley. The momentum that had been building around Samuel Reed's evidence came to a sudden halt on a bitterly cold morning, 8 days after Rachel Whitmore began investigating the case. Michael Carter woke before sunrise, following his usual routine of checking the guest cabin where Samuel stayed before beginning ranch chores. The moment he opened the cabin door, something felt wrong. A chair lay overturned near the table. Papers were scattered across the floor. One window stood partially open despite freezing temperatures. Samuel was gone. Michael immediately shifted into the calm, focused mindset that years of Navy SEAL training had ingrained into him. Panic never solved problems. Observation did. He carefully studied the scene. There were no signs of a violent struggle, but there were enough disturbances to suggest Samuel had not simply wandered away. Outside, faint boot prints led toward the tree line before disappearing beneath fresh, wind-blown snow. Daisy, now considerably stronger after giving birth, appeared at Michael's side almost immediately. The German Shepherd sniffed the area around the cabin with unusual intensity. Her amber eyes remained fixed on the distant hills. Within minutes, Michael knew what his instincts had already suspected. Someone had taken Samuel. News of Samuel's disappearance spread quickly among their small circle. Helen arrived first, her face pale with concern. The elderly widow had not slept well for days, knowing her ranch stood only 10 days away from foreclosure proceedings. Yet her own troubles vanished the moment she heard Samuel was missing. Ethan Walker arrived shortly afterward, carrying maps and GPS equipment. Rachel Whitmore drove out from town, despite dangerous road conditions. The journalist's normally composed expression revealed genuine alarm. If Samuel disappeared before speaking publicly, years of evidence might lose much of its impact. While the others discussed possibilities, Daisy continued investigating the area around the cabin. Suddenly, she stopped near a cluster of snow-covered bushes. Michael knelt beside her. There, partially hidden beneath snow, lay a wool glove. Samuel's glove. Daisy sniffed it repeatedly before lifting her head toward the northern mountains. Michael immediately understood. "She's got a scent trail," he said. Without hesitation, preparations for a search operation began. The Wyoming wilderness offered little mercy during winter. Snow still covered much of the higher elevations, and strong winds frequently erased tracks within hours. Yet Daisy moved with remarkable confidence. Carrying none of the hesitation she had shown during pregnancy, the German Shepherd navigated the terrain as though she had traveled it her entire life. Michael followed closely behind, while Ethan assisted with navigation. Several local ranchers volunteered to help as well. Among them was Robert Hayes, a 55-year-old cattle rancher with a broad frame, weathered skin, and a thick gray mustache. Years of outdoor labor had given Robert immense physical strength, but a devastating drought years earlier had nearly cost him his ranch. Since then, he had become fiercely protective of struggling landowners throughout the valley. Robert joined the search without hesitation. Throughout the day, Daisy repeatedly found clues invisible to human eyes: a broken branch, a disturbed patch of snow, the faint scent of human activity. Every time the trail seemed lost, she somehow found it again. As daylight faded, the search entered increasingly rugged terrain deep within the national forest. The mountains rose around them like frozen walls beneath a darkening sky. Temperatures dropped rapidly after sunset. Michael considered suspending the operation until morning, but Daisy refused to slow down. Several times she returned to Michael, barked once, then immediately continued forward as though urging the group to keep moving. Her determination affected everyone. Even exhausted volunteers found renewed motivation. Around midnight, the search reached an isolated ridge overlooking a remote valley. There, Daisy suddenly became more animated than at any previous point during the journey. Her pace quickened, her ears stood upright. Michael noticed fresh vehicle tracks partially preserved beneath snow. The tracks led into a narrow canyon hidden between two heavily forested slopes. Nobody spoke as they followed. The atmosphere had changed. For the first time since Samuel disappeared, they felt truly close. Several miles away, Helen faced a different battle. While Michael searched the mountains, she received official notice from county authorities confirming that foreclosure proceedings against her ranch would begin within 10 days, unless significant new legal evidence emerged. The document hit her harder than she expected. For generations, her family had lived on that land. Every fence post, every barn, every pasture carried memories of people she loved. Losing the ranch would feel like losing them all over again. Yet instead of surrendering to despair, Helen chose action. She organized another community meeting at the local church. Attendance exceeded all expectations. Ranchers, business owners, retired teachers, mechanics, and farmers filled the hall. Many brought documents, photographs, and records connected to suspicious land disputes. For the first time, the community no longer viewed the issue as Helen's problem alone. It had become everyone's fight. Rachel Whitmore attended as well, documenting testimonies and collecting information. The growing unity gave Helen strength. No matter what happened next, Jackson Valley was no longer standing alone. Back in the mountains, Daisy finally led Michael's team to a narrow clearing shortly before dawn. Hidden among dense pines stood an isolated cabin. The structure appeared old and poorly maintained, positioned far from any official road. Smoke drifted faintly from a chimney. Michael immediately signaled everyone to remain cautious. Years of military service had taught him to approach unknown situations methodically. As he observed the cabin through binoculars, he noticed signs of recent activity. A vehicle sat partially concealed beneath camouflage netting. Footprints surrounded the building. Yet something else caught his attention. Daisy stood completely still. Her eyes remained locked on the cabin door. She had found Samuel. Michael could feel it. Carefully, the group approached. When they finally entered the cabin, the scene inside confirmed their suspicions. Samuel sat tied to a chair, but appeared physically unharmed. Relief swept through the room. The older surveyor looked exhausted, yet remarkably calm. "I was hoping you'd bring the dog," he said weakly, as Daisy immediately approached him. What happened next surprised everyone. While helping Samuel gather his belongings, Michael discovered several locked filing cases stored beneath floorboards in the cabin. Samuel recognized them immediately. According to him, these were records he believed had disappeared years earlier. Inside were financial ledgers, property transfers, correspondence records, and transaction histories connecting multiple land acquisitions across several Wyoming counties. Unlike previous evidence, these documents revealed the financial structure behind the operation. They showed how properties changed hands through layers of intermediaries before eventually benefiting interests connected to Black Ridge Energy. Ethan reviewed several files and immediately understood their significance. These records could establish patterns extending far beyond Jackson Valley. The implications reached multiple communities throughout the state. Samuel's captors had unknowingly preserved some of the most valuable evidence by storing it there. As dawn broke over the mountains, Michael helped Samuel into a vehicle for the journey home. The older man looked tired, but determined. The experience had changed him. Fear no longer seemed to dominate his decisions. Instead, he appeared resolved to see the investigation through, regardless of personal risk. Nearby, Daisy sat quietly beside the vehicle. Her role in the rescue was impossible to ignore. Without her extraordinary scent-tracking abilities, the search might have failed entirely. Michael watched the German Shepherd for several moments. Once again, she had altered the course of events through nothing more than loyalty and determination. Yet even as the rescue ended successfully, larger challenges remained. Helen's ranch still faced foreclosure. Powerful interests still possessed resources and influence. The investigation was growing rapidly, but so were the stakes. As the convoy began descending toward Jackson Valley, nobody realized how close they were to uncovering the full scope of the corruption hidden beneath years of silence. The convoy began its journey back toward Jackson Valley shortly after sunrise. Fresh snow sparkled across the Wyoming mountains, disguising the danger hidden beneath the landscape. Michael Carter drove the lead vehicle, while Samuel Reed sat beside him holding several of the newly recovered document cases. Behind them, Ethan Walker followed in a pickup loaded with evidence boxes, and two local ranchers transported additional files recovered from the cabin. Daisy rode in Michael's truck as well. Although she had recently become a mother, the German Shepherd refused to leave Michael's side after the rescue. The four puppies remained safe at the ranch under Helen Brooks's care. Throughout the drive, Michael could sense a shift in Samuel's demeanor. The older surveyor no longer carried the fear that had defined him during months of hiding. Instead, there was a quiet determination in his eyes. Years of collecting evidence, running from threats, and living in isolation had finally led to this moment. For the first time, Samuel believed the truth might actually reach the public. The newly discovered files exceeded everyone's expectations. During a brief stop along the route, Ethan and Samuel opened several cases to perform a preliminary review. Inside were thousands of pages of financial records, property transfers, internal correspondence, environmental assessments, and transaction histories dating back nearly 20 years. Many of the documents directly connected shell companies, consultants, and legal intermediaries to land acquisitions that ultimately benefited Black Ridge Energy. Some files contained maps highlighting properties strategically targeted for acquisition. Others revealed suspicious financial arrangements involving individuals in multiple counties. Samuel explained that he had spent years gathering fragments of information without ever obtaining the complete picture. The records recovered from the cabin finally connected those fragments together. Even Michael, who normally approached problems with disciplined caution, understood the significance immediately. This was no longer a local dispute involving one ranch or one corporation. The evidence suggested a coordinated system operating across a large portion of Wyoming. As the convoy crossed a winding mountain pass shortly after noon, weather conditions suddenly began changing. The sky darkened. Strong winds swept loose snow across the road. Michael noticed the warning signs immediately. Years of operating in harsh environments had taught him to respect nature's unpredictability. He radioed the vehicles behind him and advised everyone to increase distance between trucks. Several minutes later, a deep rumble echoed through the mountains. At first it sounded distant, then the sound grew louder. Much louder. Michael's eyes snapped toward the slope above the roadway. Snow was moving. Entire sections of the mountainside had begun collapsing. "Avalanche!" he shouted into the radio. The convoy reacted instantly. Drivers accelerated toward safer ground, while enormous waves of snow crashed down the mountainside. The first impact struck hundreds of yards away. The second landed much closer. Then a wall of snow, ice, and shattered timber swept across the road. When the avalanche finally stopped, silence returned with terrifying speed. Ethan's truck remained upright. The rancher's vehicles had escaped major damage, but Michael's truck had vanished. Samuel stumbled from the passenger side after being thrown clear during the chaos. His shoulder hurt, but he remained conscious. Everyone immediately began searching. Snow covered the roadway in places more than 10 feet deep. Pieces of shattered trees lay scattered across the slope. For several minutes, nobody could determine where Michael had gone. Panic threatened to overwhelm the group. Then Daisy appeared. The German Shepherd had been thrown from the vehicle but escaped serious injury. Snow covered portions of her coat, yet she ignored her own condition entirely. Instead, she began running frantically across the avalanche field. Her nose remained low to the snow, while her ears twitched constantly. She searched one area, then another. Suddenly she stopped. A sharp bark shattered the silence. The volunteers rushed toward her location. Daisy immediately began digging. Snow flew behind her powerful front legs as she clawed desperately at the frozen debris. Michael was nowhere visible, yet Daisy refused to stop. Again and again she barked, before returning to her frantic excavation. Samuel watched in amazement. The same dog that had unknowingly saved his life months earlier now seemed determined to save Michael's as well. Ethan joined the digging effort. So did the ranchers. Minutes passed. Then one of the men heard something, a faint sound beneath the snow. Everyone froze. The noise came again. Michael was alive. Encouraged by Daisy's persistence, the group dug faster. Eventually, they uncovered part of a crushed section of truck cab buried beneath snow and timber. Trapped underneath was Michael. A heavy beam pinned one leg, but he remained conscious. Later, he would admit that hearing Daisy's barking had been the moment he realized rescue was coming. The recovery operation lasted nearly an hour. Once freed, Michael was examined by paramedics from a nearby rescue team. Fortunately, he had escaped with minor injuries, bruises, and exhaustion. As he sat wrapped in blankets beside an emergency vehicle, Daisy refused to leave him. The German Shepherd rested her head against his knee while volunteers worked around them. More than one witness captured photographs of the scene. A mother dog standing guard over the man she had just helped save. The images spread rapidly throughout Jackson Valley and eventually across much of Wyoming. Local news outlets picked up the story first, then regional stations followed. Soon, people throughout the state learned about Daisy, the abandoned mother dog who had helped uncover evidence, rescue a missing witness, and save a Navy SEAL from an avalanche. Yet Michael cared little about attention. He simply scratched behind Daisy's ears and quietly thanked her. For a brief moment, neither corruption investigations nor legal battles mattered. Only gratitude remained. The avalanche incident changed Samuel as much as it changed Michael. Witnessing how close everything had come to disaster forced the older man to confront an uncomfortable truth. He could not spend the rest of his life hiding. Too many people had already risked too much. Helen risked losing her wrench. Michael risked his safety repeatedly. Entire families across the valley were standing up and sharing painful experiences. Samuel realized the evidence belonged to more than him now. It belonged to everyone affected by the corruption. Upon returning to Jackson Valley, he made a decision. Instead of remaining hidden, he would speak publicly. Rachel Whitmore immediately helped organize a press conference. The journalist understood the importance of timing. Public attention surrounding Daisy's rescue had created an opportunity that might never come again. For the first time, Local media, state reporters, environmental groups, and community leaders all focused on the same story. 3 days later, the largest gathering in recent valley history filled the community center. Farmers, ranchers, business owners, reporters, and concerned residents packed the building. Helen sat near the front beside Daisy and the 4 puppies, who had grown noticeably stronger since their rescue. Michael occupied a seat nearby with one leg still wrapped from avalanche injuries. When Samuel finally approached the podium, the room became completely silent. The older surveyor looked different than the frightened man hidden beneath the warehouse floor. His shoulders stood straighter. His voice carried confidence. For nearly an hour, he explained what he had discovered. He presented maps, records, financial documents, and environmental reports. He described years of questionable acquisitions and outlined evidence connecting multiple individuals to coordinated misconduct. Most importantly, he announced that complete copies of all materials had already been transferred to federal investigators. No single person could make them disappear anymore. As applause filled the hall, Michael glanced toward Daisy. The German Shepherd sat calmly beside Helen, while her puppies slept nearby. She had no understanding of press conferences, investigations, or legal proceedings. Yet everyone in the room knew she had played a crucial role in reaching that moment. Without Daisy, Samuel would never have survived. Without Daisy, the warehouse would never have been found. Without Daisy, Michael might still be buried beneath a Wyoming mountainside. The fight ahead was far from over, but the truth now belonged to an entire community rather than a handful of isolated individuals. For the first time since the story began, justice felt possible. The weeks following Samuel Reed's public testimony transformed Jackson Valley in ways few people could have imagined. What had started as a mystery involving a pregnant German Shepherd had evolved into the largest investigation the region had seen in generations. Federal investigators arrived from Cheyenne, Denver, and several neighboring jurisdictions. Teams of analysts spent long days reviewing financial records, environmental reports, property transfers, and thousands of pages of documents Samuel had preserved over the years. Michael Carter watched much of it unfold from the sidelines while recovering from the avalanche injuries that still occasionally caused pain in his leg. As a Navy SEAL, he was accustomed to seeing missions reach clear conclusions. This situation felt different. The truth moved more slowly than any military operation. Yet every day brought new developments. Each discovery confirmed what Samuel had risked everything to expose. The evidence pointed toward a vast network of manipulation involving land acquisitions, hidden financial arrangements, and coordinated pressure campaigns against small property owners across multiple Wyoming counties. Federal agents soon began conducting formal interviews throughout the valley. One of the lead investigators was Olivia Grant, a 44-year-old federal attorney assigned to oversee portions of the case. Olivia stood tall, with an athletic build, shoulder-length dark brown hair, and sharp green eyes that missed very little. Years earlier, she had built her reputation investigating corporate fraud cases that often pitted ordinary citizens against powerful institutions. A difficult childhood spent watching her family's small business collapse due to unethical financial practices had shaped her determination to pursue accountability wherever evidence led. Unlike many attorneys, Olivia spoke plainly and listened carefully. When she met Helen Brooks for the first time, she spent nearly 3 hours reviewing decades of property records, family documents, and correspondence. By the end of the meeting, Olivia understood that Helen's story was not an isolated case. It represented a pattern repeated throughout the region. Similar stories emerged from ranchers, farmers, retirees, and landowners who had quietly endured years of pressure without realizing how many others shared their experiences. As investigators followed financial trails hidden within Samuel's records, the scale of the operation became increasingly clear. Hundreds of unusual land transactions appeared connected through layers of consulting firms, legal entities, and intermediary businesses. Several local officials faced scrutiny after investigators discovered irregular decision-making patterns surrounding zoning changes and property disputes. Multiple attorneys were questioned regarding documentation practices tied to contested acquisitions. Federal search warrants generated headlines across Wyoming. While the investigation remained professional and evidence-driven, the public impact was undeniable. Jackson Valley suddenly found itself at the center of statewide attention. Yet amid the legal developments, something even more meaningful was occurring within the community itself. For years, many residents had quietly believed their struggles were unique. Now they discovered neighbors carrying similar burdens. That realization changed everything. The town church became the unofficial heart of the movement. Every Thursday evening, dozens of families gathered beneath its wooden rafters. Ranchers compared records. Retired teachers organized document archives. Local business owners donated supplies for community events. Volunteers assisted elderly residents with paperwork and legal filings. Helen Brooks gradually emerged as one of the most respected voices within the valley. Despite her age, she attended nearly every meeting. Her calm presence reassured people who felt overwhelmed by years of uncertainty. What impressed Michael most was that Helen never positioned herself as a leader seeking attention. She simply showed up every day and helped wherever needed. People trusted her because she understood their fears. She knew what it felt like to worry about losing a family legacy. That authenticity inspired others to speak openly. Stories that had remained hidden for years finally surfaced. Meanwhile, Daisy and her puppies became unexpected symbols of hope throughout Jackson Valley. The puppies were growing quickly. Their classic black and tan working line coats became more visible with each passing week. Each displayed a distinct personality. The largest male possessed boundless confidence and constantly explored beyond his mother's immediate supervision. Another showed remarkable curiosity, investigating every new sound or scent. A third remained calm and observant, often sitting quietly beside Daisy while watching activity around the ranch. The smallest puppy, once the weakest of the litter, surprised everyone with his resilience and determination. Visitors frequently stopped by Michael's ranch to check on them. Children were never a focus of the story, but adults from across the region found comfort in seeing the little family thrive after everything they had endured. Daisy accepted the attention gracefully. Though still protective of her puppies, she no longer carried the fear that once defined her life beside the snowy roadside. Rachel Whitmore's reporting continued playing a major role as well. The journalist spent months documenting developments, interviewing affected families, and explaining complex legal issues in language ordinary people could understand. Her articles attracted statewide readership. More importantly, they prevented the story from disappearing beneath larger news cycles. Rachel understood that accountability often depended upon sustained public attention. During one interview, she described Jackson Valley as a reminder that communities become strongest when people stop facing problems alone. The quote spread widely. Many residents later repeated those words during public meetings and local gatherings. Even Michael found himself reflecting on the idea. Throughout much of his military career, teamwork had been essential to survival. Now he witnessed the same principle operating within civilian life. Individual courage mattered. Collective courage changed entire communities. As spring gradually replaced winter, federal investigators completed several major phases of their inquiry. Civil proceedings moved forward. Property records were corrected. Legal challenges that had burdened numerous families for years began collapsing under scrutiny. Financial settlements followed. While the exact amounts varied, compensation packages ultimately returned millions of dollars to affected landowners across the region. Helen received official confirmation that her ranch would remain permanently protected under revised legal agreements. The news arrived on a warm afternoon while she was repairing a fence line with Martha Collins and several neighboring ranchers. For a long moment, Helen simply stared at the document. Then she smiled. It was not the excited smile of someone winning a battle. It was the relieved smile of someone finally putting down a weight she had carried for far too long. Nearby, Daisy rested beneath a cottonwood tree while her puppies played in the grass. The scene felt almost unreal compared to the fear and uncertainty of the previous winter. The final public hearing took place several months later in a packed regional courthouse. Journalists filled every available seat. Community members traveled from multiple counties to attend. Samuel Reed sat near the front beside Michael, Helen, Ethan, Rachel, and several families whose stories had become part of the broader investigation. The older surveyor looked healthier than he had at any point since being discovered beneath the warehouse. His silver hair remained untidy, but his eyes carried a sense of peace that had been absent for years. When invited to address the audience, Samuel rose slowly and approached the podium. The room fell silent. Rather than discussing himself, he spoke about everyone who had contributed to the outcome. He spoke about ranchers who refused to surrender. He spoke about neighbors who helped one another. He spoke about journalists, investigators, volunteers, and ordinary citizens who chose honesty over convenience. Finally, he looked toward Helen and Michael before delivering the statement many would later remember most. This victory belongs to every person who refused to bow to injustice, even when standing up felt impossible. The applause lasted several minutes. Michael remained seated, watching the crowd rather than the stage. Around him sat people who only months earlier believed they were powerless. Now they stood together. The corruption investigation had certainly exposed wrongdoing, yet perhaps its greatest achievement was something less measurable. It had rebuilt trust between neighbors. It had reminded people that communities become resilient when individuals choose solidarity over isolation. As the hearing concluded and families began leaving the courthouse, Michael noticed Daisy waiting outside beside Helen. The German Shepherd watched the crowd with calm, amber eyes, while her growing puppies rested nearby. She had no idea that her actions had helped uncover years of corruption, save family ranches, and unite an entire valley. She simply remained what she had always been, a loyal mother who refused to abandon those who needed help. Sometimes, Michael reflected, that was exactly how change began. 1 year later, spring arrived in Jackson Valley with a beauty few residents could remember seeing before. The snow that had once buried roads and hidden secrets had long since melted away, replaced by green pastures, blooming cottonwoods, and fields stretching beneath endless Wyoming skies. Yet the greatest transformation was not found in the landscape. It was found in the people. Families who had once lived with fear now planned for the future. Neighbors who barely knew one another had become partners, friends, and supporters. The investigation that had begun with a hungry, pregnant German shepherd beside a snowy road had permanently changed the valley. Federal cases continued moving through the courts. Compensation had reached affected landowners, and corrected property records restored rights to families across the region. But what mattered most was something no legal document could measure. Trust had returned. Jackson Valley felt like a community again. One of the first major projects funded through settlement proceeds was the creation of the Valley Hope Community Fund. The idea originated during a church meeting when several residents discussed how many elderly ranchers, struggling veterans, and isolated individuals still faced hardships despite the legal victories. Rather than focusing only on the past, they wanted to build something for the future. Helen Brooks became one of the strongest supporters of the initiative. At 72 years old, she remained physically slower than before, but her determination had only grown stronger. Her silver hair was now almost completely white, usually tied into a loose bun beneath a weathered ranch hat. Years of hardship had given her quiet wisdom rather than bitterness. The Valley Hope Fund began providing assistance to elderly farmers facing financial difficulties, veterans transitioning back into civilian life, and animal rescue programs throughout Wyoming. What started as a small, local effort soon attracted support from neighboring counties. Helen made another decision that surprised many people. She donated a portion of her ranch property to establish the Daisy Foundation Rescue Center. The facility was designed to serve several purposes at once. It provided shelter for abandoned animals, rehabilitation programs for neglected working dogs, community gathering spaces, and support activities for veterans and senior citizens. Helen often said that Daisy had never separated people according to background, age, or circumstance. The center should reflect the same philosophy. Construction began during summer and finished before winter arrived. The completed building stood beside a large open field surrounded by cottonwood trees. Visitors immediately noticed how welcoming it felt. There were walking trails, meeting rooms, training areas, and comfortable outdoor spaces where people could simply sit and talk. Over time, many residents admitted they visited as much for human companionship as for the animals. The 4 puppies Daisy had given birth to inside the abandoned warehouse had grown into remarkable dogs. Their classic working-line German Shepherd appearance reflected their mother perfectly. Deep, matte black saddles covering their backs, black facial masks, medium warm tan legs and chests, powerful athletic builds, and intelligent amber eyes. Each developed a different path in life. Ranger, the largest and most confident of the litter, entered a regional search and rescue program. His courage and determination made him exceptionally effective in wilderness operations. Scout, whose nose had impressed everyone since puppyhood, joined a specialized tracking and detection unit that assisted emergency response teams throughout Wyoming. Echo, the thoughtful and people-oriented brother, became part of a therapy support program helping military veterans dealing with loneliness and emotional struggles. The 4th puppy, Grace, the only female of the litter, remained at the Daisy Foundation Rescue Center. Grace possessed her mother's calm temperament and extraordinary ability to comfort frightened animals arriving at the shelter. Together, the 4 siblings became living reminders of how far their family had come. Michael Carter watched much of this development with quiet pride. The 37-year-old active-duty Navy SEAL had spent another year balancing military responsibilities with life in Jackson Valley. His appearance remained largely unchanged. Lean, muscular build, angular face, short, dark brown hair with a high fade, steel blue eyes, and the faint jaw scar earned years earlier during overseas operations. Yet, internally, he had changed more than anyone realized. When Daisy first appeared beside the snowy roadside, Michael had been a man carrying grief, isolation, and emotional distance. Now his life contained relationships he never expected to have again. He remained disciplined and reserved, but no longer isolated himself from the people around him. The valley had become home in a way it had never felt before. Perhaps that was why the new military orders affected him more than expected. Late one afternoon, official deployment instructions arrived. Michael was being recalled to active operational duties with his Navy SEAL unit. The assignment would take him away from Wyoming for an extended period. Although military service had always been part of his identity, leaving felt different this time. News of his departure spread quickly throughout Jackson Valley. During the months that followed, preparations began for a community gathering before he left. Michael repeatedly insisted such attention was unnecessary. Nobody listened. The people of Jackson Valley understood how much he had contributed. Without his willingness to stop for a hungry dog, none of the events that followed would have occurred. More importantly, they wanted him to know that his efforts mattered. The farewell gathering eventually became one of the largest community events the valley had ever organized. On the evening before his departure, hundreds of residents gathered near the Daisy Foundation Rescue Center. Ranchers, business owners, retirees, volunteers, federal investigators who had worked the case, and families whose properties had been saved all attended. Samuel Reed was there as well. The older surveyor looked healthier than ever. His posture stood straighter. The fear that once controlled his life had disappeared. Rachel Whitmore attended, carrying a camera, but spent most of the evening simply enjoying conversations rather than conducting interviews. Olivia Grant traveled back to Jackson Valley for the event, explaining that some victories deserved witnessing in person. As the sun began setting across the valley, people shared stories, meals, and memories. Michael spent much of the evening listening. Again and again, he heard versions of the same message. The valley had not simply survived, it had become stronger. Several months after Michael returned to duty, another project reached completion. At the center of Jackson Valley, residents unveiled a new community memorial garden. Volunteers of every age contributed labor, materials, and landscaping efforts. Walking paths wound through flower beds and native trees. Benches offered places for conversation and reflection. At the center stood a bronze statue unlike any monument the town had ever commissioned. The sculpture depicted Daisy sitting calmly with the worn leather strap that she had carried during the winter she first appeared beside the road. The artist had captured her expression perfectly. Not heroic in a dramatic sense, simply attentive, loyal, and patient. Beneath the statue rested a small plaque containing a single sentence. One forgotten dog reminded an entire community that no one should face hardship alone. The dedication ceremony drew visitors from across Wyoming. Helen spoke briefly. Samuel spoke as well. Rachel documented the event for a final feature article. Yet the moment many remembered most happened after the speeches ended. Daisy herself, older now but still healthy, wandered through the garden beneath the shade of a young cottonwood tree. Nearby, volunteers repaired fences for a local rancher recovering from surgery. Others planted flowers. Families shared food at picnic tables. Veterans talked quietly beneath the pavilion. Rescue dogs played in the grass beside newly arrived shelter animals. Daisy simply lay down and watched. The scene reflected everything her journey had created. Michael once believed he had rescued a pregnant German shepherd during a difficult winter. The truth was far larger. Daisy had saved Samuel's life. She had helped protect Helen's ranch. She had exposed corruption that harmed countless families. She had reunited neighbors who had forgotten how much they needed one another. Most importantly, she had reminded an entire community that kindness grows strongest when shared. And beneath the Wyoming spring sky, surrounded by people building a better future together, Daisy's legacy continued to live.
Sometimes the miracles God sends into our lives do not arrive with certainty, strength, or easy answers. Sometimes they arrive quietly through unexpected companions, second chances, and the courage to keep moving forward when life feels uncertain. In Aspen Creek, one loyal German shepherd helped uncover the truth, heal old wounds, and remind an entire community that hope is never truly lost. If this story touched your heart, share where you're watching from. Leave a comment about the moment that meant the most to you, and subscribe for more stories of faith, resilience, and redemption. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, guide your steps, and fill your heart with peace wherever you are tonight.